After an exhausting business meeting, Jake Anderson was driving down the road, eager to get home. Along the way, as he passed an overpass, he spotted a small, fragile-looking girl with a lost expression. The resemblance to his deceased daughter, Emily, was shocking. He couldn't believe his eyes, and with his heart racing, he made a sudden U-turn. Jake got out of the car, still stunned by the sight of the girl. "Hi, are you okay? Are you here alone?" he asked, trying to appear calm. The girl looked at him with suspicion but nodded. Jake persisted. "What's your name? How did you end up here?" The girl hesitated before answering. "My name is Emily. I have nowhere to go." The name hit Jake like a ton of bricks, almost knocking the breath out of him. He continued, "Emily, you can't stay here alone. Come with me to my house. I can help you." Emily looked at the dog beside her and replied firmly, "I'll go, but only if my dog can come too." Jake smiled, surprised by the determination in her voice. "Of course, both of you can come." Jake opened the car door and helped Emily and the dog inside. "Everything will be all right," he said, more to himself than to her, as he started the engine and drove towards his home. On the way, Jake tried to make conversation to learn more about Emily. "Where did you come from? How did you end up here?" The girl responded with few words, still suspicious, but enough for Jake to understand that she needed help. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. Upon arriving at Jake's imposing mansion, Emily's eyes widened in amazement at the beauty and size of the place. The dog wagged its tail, happy to be in a more welcoming environment. Jake opened the front door and gestured for both of them to enter. "Welcome to your new home," he said with a warm smile. As he watched the girl timidly step into the mansion, he felt a warmth in his heart that he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if his daughter had somehow returned, and this feeling was as comforting as it was painful. As they entered the house, Emily was awestruck by the mansion's vastness and beauty. "Wow, this place is huge!" she exclaimed in amazement. Susan, Jake's loyal housekeeper, appeared in the living room with a worried expression. "Jake, who is this girl?" she asked, casting a suspicious glance at Emily and her dog. Jake approached Susan and whispered, "She needs our help, Susan. We'll take care of her." Susan, though hesitant, nodded. "Jake, are you sure about this? You barely know her." After Jake explained the girl's name and situation, Susan was astonished and agreed initially. Jake arranged for a hot bath for Emily and clean clothes for her to wear. While she bathed, he asked Susan to prepare a nutritious meal. "And call a veterinarian to take care of Emily's dog," he added. Susan, still with doubts, began preparing the meal and making the necessary calls. When Emily emerged from the bath, she was visibly more relaxed and clean. Jake led her to the dining room, where a table full of delicious food awaited her. "Sit down. Eat as much as you want," Jake said with a welcoming smile. Emily sat down timidly but soon began to eat hungrily, her dog lying at her feet, also being well taken care of. Jake watched Emily with a mixture of sadness and hope. Every movement she made reminded him of his deceased daughter, and he wondered what kind of life she had lived until then. "You are safe here, Emily. We'll take care of you and your dog," he said softly, trying to comfort her. Emily looked up, her lips curving into a slight smile of gratitude. After dinner, Susan informed them that the veterinarian would arrive soon. "We'll make sure your dog is healthy and happy," Jake told Emily. The girl nodded, relieved to see that her faithful companion would also be well cared for. "Thank you, Jake," she murmured, emotional. While the veterinarian examined the dog, Jake showed Emily her new room. It was a spacious room with a soft bed and toys his daughter used to have. "I hope you like it here," Jake said, watching Emily's reaction. She looked around, amazed. "It's perfect," she replied with a sparkle in her eyes. Jake left the room, allowing Emily to familiarize herself with the new environment. He felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Bringing Emily home was an impulsive decision, but he believed it was the right thing to do. After a satisfying meal and a relaxing bath, Emily began to explore the enormous mansion. Every corner of the place seemed to hide a new surprise. As she wandered through the halls, she entered a room that felt particularly cozy. There, sitting in a rocking chair, was Margaret, Jake's mother, who suffered from Alzheimer's. Emily approached timidly. "Hi, how are you?" she asked softly. Margaret looked at her, her eyes vacant but with a glimmer of recognition. Do I know you?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. Emily smiled, trying to ease the tension. "My name is Emily. Can I tell you a story?" Margaret nodded, and Emily began to narrate a story her mother used to tell. With each word, Margaret seemed more present, as if memories were trying to emerge from the fog of her mind. Jake, standing at the door, watched silently, moved by seeing his mother react in this way. "You remind me of someone," said Margaret, her eyes filled with tears. "My granddaughter. Her name was Emily too." The revelation brought tears to Jake's eyes. He entered the room and knelt beside his mother. "Mom, this is Emily, the girl I found today. She's going to stay with us." Margaret held Jake's hand, her eyes fixed on the girl. "Emily, would you like to hear a story from me too?" she asked, her voice weak but full of emotion. Emily nodded, enchanted. Margaret began to tell a story about her son, Jake, when he was a child. The memories came slowly but with surprising clarity. Jake felt a warmth in his chest as he listened to his mother recall moments from his childhood. Emily was captivated, her eyes shining with interest. "You have many stories, Margaret," said Emily with admiration. Margaret smiled, a rare expression in recent years. "Yes, dear, I have many stories stored away." The connection forming between Emily and Margaret was something Jake never expected to see. His mother, usually trapped in her own world, was now there, present and engaged. "I'll take care of her, Mom, just as I take care of you," Jake promised, holding Margaret's hand firmly. The night continued with Emily listening to more stories and sharing some of her own adventures from the street. Margaret seemed more alive than ever, and Jake saw a glimmer of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. Emily, with her presence, was bringing an unexpected light into their lives. Days after her arrival, Emily was running around the house, playing with her dog. Jake's mansion was a true labyrinth of rooms and corridors, each more fascinating than the last. During one of her explorations, she found an old room filled with antique objects and elegant furniture. Curious, Emily began to rummage through the shelves and drawers until she found an old diary hidden among some books. The diary belonged to Margaret and was full of memories and poems. "I wonder what's in here?" she murmured to herself as she began to leaf through the yellowed pages. Each page of the diary told a different story. There were detailed accounts of Jake's childhood, happy family moments, and, most notably, poems that Margaret wrote to express her feelings. Emily was particularly touched by a song Margaret had composed for Jake when he was a child. "How beautiful!" she whispered as she read the melodic words. Jake found Emily sitting on the floor of the room, engrossed in the diary. "What did you find there?" he asked, approaching her. Emily looked up, her eyes shining with emotion. "It's your mother's diary. It has incredible poems and memories in here." Jake knelt beside her, carefully taking the diary. "I remember this diary," he said with a nostalgic smile. "My mother was always a great poet." Emily continued to flip through the pages, finding more poems and drawings. "Your mother really loved you a lot," she commented, looking at Jake. He nodded, his eyes full of memories. "Yes, she was always very loving and creative. These poems bring back many memories." Inspired by her discoveries, Emily decided she wanted to learn more about Margaret's poetry and life. "Do you think these poems might help your mother remember things?" she asked, hopeful. Jake looked at her with surprise and a glimmer of hope. "Maybe," he replied thoughtfully. "We can try." Emily spent the rest of the day reading more poems and memories from the diary. Each new discovery made her feel more connected to Margaret and Jake. "I'll do everything I can to help," she thought to herself, determined to bring some joy and clarity to Margaret's life. That night, as Emily lay in her new bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the diary and the poems. Tomorrow, I'll recite some poems to Margaret, she decided, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. Maybe, just maybe, those words could open a window in Margaret's mind, bringing back some of the precious memories that seemed lost. The next day, determined to help Margaret recover her memories, Emily got up early. With Margaret's diary in hand, she headed to the elderly woman's room, where Margaret was sitting near the window, looking at the garden. "Good morning, Margaret," Emily said, entering slowly. Margaret looked at her and smiled faintly. "Good morning, dear," Margaret responded, still with a distant look as if she no longer recognized Emily. Emily sat beside her, holding the diary carefully. "I found some beautiful poems you wrote. Can I read them to you?" she asked. Margaret nodded. Emily opened the diary and began reciting one of the poems aloud. At first, Margaret just listened, without showing many signs of recognition. Emily remained determined to reach something inside her. "You are a great poet, you know?" Emily said, trying to engage Margaret in conversation. The elderly woman smiled, but her eyes still seemed lost in thought. Emily did not give up. She spent the rest of the morning reading various poems, sometimes stopping to ask Margaret about the details. "Do you remember when you wrote this?" she asked, hoping for a reaction. Margaret sometimes seemed to try to remember, but soon returned to her state of confusion. Jake watched everything from afar, moved by Emily's dedication. "She is really trying," he thought, admiring the girl's resilience. Emily, for her part, felt she was fighting a difficult battle but did not let it discourage her. "I will keep trying," she murmured to herself. With each attempt, Emily felt she was getting closer to reaching a hidden memory. "Maybe a song will help more," she thought, remembering the song Margaret had written for Jake. "Do you remember the song you wrote for Jake?" she asked, hoping for a more enthusiastic response. Margaret looked at Emily with a confused expression, but there seemed to be a flicker of recognition. "Song?" she asked, as if trying to remember something very important. Emily nodded energetically. "Yes, you wrote a beautiful song for him. Can I sing it to you?" With Margaret's permission, Emily began to sing the song softly, the melody echoing through the room. Jake, standing at the door, felt a wave of emotions as he heard Emily's sweet voice singing the song his mother had composed. Margaret gradually seemed to reconnect with the melody, though still without major signs of recognition. Even without immediate success, Emily did not lose hope. "We will try again tomorrow," she said, closing the diary gently. Margaret smiled at her, and Emily returned the smile encouragingly. "We'll keep trying, okay?" Margaret nodded slightly. Emily woke up early again, determined to continue her attempts to help Margaret recover her memories. After breakfast, she grabbed the diary and went to Margaret's room, where the elderly woman was sitting in her rocking chair. "Good morning, Margaret. Today, I would like to sing the song you wrote for Jake," Emily said with an encouraging smile. Margaret looked at Emily, a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "Song?" she asked, trying to remember. Emily nodded and began to softly sing the melody she had read in the diary. Emily's sweet voice filled the room, creating a magical and peaceful atmosphere. As Emily sang, something surprising happened. Margaret started to hum the melody, following along with Emily. Her eyes, once lost, now seemed focused and full of emotion. "I know this song," Margaret said, her voice trembling. Emily continued singing, encouraging her to join in. Jake, who was watching from the door, felt tears streaming down his face. It was the first time in years he had seen his mother so present, so connected to the moment. Margaret began to sing along with Emily, her voice gaining strength with each verse. "You're remembering, Margaret. Keep going," exclaimed Emily, moved. Margaret held Emily's hand and looked directly at Jake. "Jake, this was our song," she said with surprising clarity. Jake entered the room, kneeling beside his mother. "Yes, Mom, it was our song. Do you remember anything else?" he asked, hopeful. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, as if searching for memories. "I remember you, my boy. You always loved it when I sang this song," she said, caressing Jake's face. Emily, holding back tears, felt she had finally reached something deep within Margaret. Margaret's moment of clarity brought an indescribable warmth to Jake's heart. He knew these moments were rare and precious, and every second counted. "Thank you, Emily. You brought my mother back, even if just for a brief moment," he said, his voice laden with gratitude. Margaret continued to sing the melody while Jake and Emily accompanied her. The room was filled with a sense of peace and unity. "Let's keep doing this, Margaret. Together, we can bring more of these memories back," Emily said, smiling. That moment of lucidity was a milestone in everyone's life. Margaret, though still trapped in her foggy world, showed signs of reconnection thanks to Emily's determination. Moved by the bond formed between Emily and his mother, Jake began to consider an important decision. During a conversation with Susan in the kitchen, he expressed his feelings. "Susan, I've been thinking a lot about Emily. She has brought a light to our home that I haven't seen in years," he said thoughtfully. Susan looked at him, recognizing the sincerity in his words. "She is a special girl, Jake. We all feel it." Jake took a deep breath and gathered the courage to share his idea. "I'm thinking of adopting Emily. I want her to be a real part of our family," he revealed. Susan, initially surprised, pondered for a moment. "Are you sure about this, Jake? It's a big responsibility." "Yes, I am. She needs a family, and we need her," Jake responded firmly. Seeing the determination in Jake's eyes, Susan nodded. "Then I think it's a good idea. She's already part of us, even if not officially," she said, smiling. That night, Jake called Emily for a serious conversation in the living room. "Emily, I have something important to tell you," he began, looking into the girl's eyes. Emily, a bit nervous, asked, "What is it, Jake?" He took a deep breath and held her hands. "I would like to adopt you if you want. I want you to be a part of our family, officially." Emily was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Her eyes filled with tears of joy. "Do you really want me to stay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake nodded, smiling. "Yes, Emily. You have brought joy into our lives, and I want that to continue." Emily jumped into Jake's arms, hugging him tightly. "Thank you, Jake. I would love to be part of your family," she said emotionally. Jake felt immense relief and indescribable happiness upon hearing those words. "Then it's settled. We'll start the adoption process," he declared with a broad smile. Jake shared the decision with Margaret, who, in a rare moment of lucidity, smiled and said, "Emily, I've always wanted a granddaughter like you." Emotion overwhelmed everyone, and even Susan, who was hesitant at first, began to grow more fond of Emily, seeing the positive impact she brought to the house. The following days were filled with preparations and visits to lawyers to initiate the legal adoption process. Jake was determined to do everything correctly and as quickly as possible. "You deserve a family that loves you, Emily," he said as they filled out the forms together. With the decision to adopt Emily made, Jake and Emily began spending more time together, strengthening their bond. On a sunny afternoon, they went to the park with Emily's dog, playing and laughing like father and daughter. "Did you know I loved playing in the park when I was a kid?" Jake said, pushing Emily on the swing. "Really? What did you like to do the most?" she asked, curious. "Playing tag. I was always very fast," he replied, winking. Meanwhile, Susan was busy in the kitchen, preparing a special cake to celebrate the new phase. "We'll throw a welcome party when the adoption is official," she commented with a smile. "Emily deserves to feel loved and welcomed." Jake walked into the kitchen and heard the conversation. "Great idea, Susan. She will love it." Emily was also adapting well to her new school environment. Jake helped her with her homework every night. "So, how was school today?" he asked as they reviewed the math lesson. "It was cool. I made new friends," Emily replied excitedly. "I'm glad to hear that. If you need help with anything, I'm here," Jake said, feeling more and more like a real father. Every day, Emily and Jake found new ways to connect. One night, while watching a movie together in the living room, Emily snuggled up next to Jake. "Do you think your mom will like me even when she doesn't remember?" she asked, with a tone of insecurity. Jake hugged her, Of course, Emily, you've brought light into our lives. She'll always feel that, even if she can't express it. Special moments weren't limited to inside the house. Jake took Emily to see the mansion's garden, where he and his late daughter used to plant flowers. "This was my daughter's favorite place," he said, showing her a recently bloomed rose. "You can plant your own flower here if you like." Emily smiled, touched. "I'd love to," she replied, choosing a small seedling to plant. As the adoption process progressed, Jake also began preparing Emily's room, making it more personalized. "I want you to feel at home," he said, helping her choose the wall color and furniture. "Can I put pictures of my parents here?" Emily asked. "Of course, this is your space now," Jake replied, feeling grateful to provide a safe home for her. Emily had told him that her parents had passed away, and he didn't want to erase that memory from her. The day of the official adoption was approaching, and the house was in a state of joyful anticipation. Margaret, in her lucid moments, expressed her happiness to have Emily around. "You are a darling," she said, holding the girl's hand. Emily, feeling more and more part of the family, reciprocated the affection. "I love you all." Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. Jake, Emily, and Susan were nervous but optimistic. "Everything will be all right," Jake said, holding Emily's hand as they waited in the courtroom. The judge, after reviewing all the documents, smiled and declared, "Congratulations, Jake Anderson. From today, you have provisional custody of Emily." The room erupted in applause and tears of joy. Jake, Susan, and even Margaret felt revitalized by the girl's liveliness. "It's amazing how she has transformed this place," Susan commented while preparing breakfast. Jake smiled, agreeing. "She brought a light that had long been extinguished." Emily, for her part, was adapting wonderfully to her new home. The mornings were filled with laughter and play in the garden, where she and the dog ran freely. "Be careful not to step on the flowers," Jake joked, watching the girl. "I promise I'll take good care of them," Emily replied, laughing. Susan, initially reluctant, began to grow deeply fond of Emily. "Dear, would you like to help me bake a cake?" she asked one day. Emily, excited, responded, "Of course, Susan. I love cooking." The two spent the afternoon together in the kitchen, sharing stories and laughter. "You are a good girl, Emily," Susan said, hugging her. "Thank you, Susan. You are like a grandmother to me," Emily replied, touched. Emily's studies were also progressing well. Susan and Jake took turns helping her with her homework. "Let's review this science material together," Susan said, sitting with Emily in the living room. "With your help, I think I'll get an A," Emily responded confidently. Susan smiled, proud of the girl's progress. Evenings at the mansion also took on a new rhythm. Emily loved telling stories to Margaret before bed, a tradition that brought them closer. "Tonight I'll tell the story of a girl who found a new family," Emily said, beginning her narrative. Margaret, in her moments of clarity, listened attentively and smiled. "You are my granddaughter now, Emily," she said, caressing the girl's face. The bond between Jake and Emily also strengthened. They spent hours talking and sharing stories of their lives. "I used to come here with my daughter," Jake said, showing Emily an old photo album. "She was so beautiful," Emily commented, admiring the pictures. "And now you are part of these memories," Jake responded, moved. Emily also brought new traditions to the mansion. She suggested that everyone have dinner together in the dining room, something that hadn't happened in a long time. "Let's make this a tradition, okay?" she said. Everyone agreed, and family dinner nights became moments of unity and joy. Even Emily's dog seemed happier at the mansion. "He loves running around the garden," Emily said, watching her faithful companion play. Jake, seeing the happiness in Emily's eyes, felt grateful to have found her. "You brought life back to this house," he said, hugging the girl. With each passing day, the mansion transformed into a true home for everyone. Emily, with her presence, managed to unite the family in a way Jake never imagined possible. And so, the mansion that was once silent and lonely now vibrated with the joy and energy of a new life. One day, while the house was filled with laughter and joy, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Susan, surprised by the unexpected visit, went to answer the door. Upon opening it, she was met with a poorly dressed man with an arrogant expression. "I'm Emily's uncle and I've come to take her back," he said bluntly, his rough voice filling the hallway. The tension in the air was palpable. Jake, hearing the conversation, quickly approached. "Emily has an uncle?" he asked, suspicious. The man crossed his arms and stared at Jake. "Yes, I'm her father's brother. I'm here to take her back," he stated, showing no genuine emotion. Jake asked Emily to go to her room, assuring her he would handle the situation. Emily looked worriedly at Jake but obeyed, climbing the stairs with a heavy heart. Her uncle watched her go, a poorly disguised look of interest in his eyes. Jake closed the door behind Emily and turned to the man. "What do you really want?" Emily's uncle, realizing that Jake wouldn't be easily intimidated, changed his approach. "Look, I know you have money, and I know you're attached to the girl. Let's make this easy. Give me a good amount and I'll disappear," he said with a cynical smile. Jake felt his anger boiling but remained calm. "You don't care about Emily, you're just after money," he accused. "You know nothing about me or my family," the uncle retorted, trying to sound offended. "I only want what's best for her." Jake laughed without humor. "What's best for her? You left her alone on the streets. She doesn't need you," he said firmly. The uncle narrowed his eyes. "You have no right to judge. She's my niece, and I have rights over her." Susan, who had been watching closely, sensed the danger in the situation. "Jake, maybe we should call the police," she suggested quietly. The uncle heard and laughed. "Oh, so that's how it's going to be? Fine, call the police. Let's see how this ends," he said defiantly. Jake knew he needed to act smartly. "Listen, I don't want trouble, but you're not taking Emily from here. She's happy and safe here," he said, trying to keep the situation under control. "I have documents showing I'm legally caring for her," he added, lying in hopes of deterring the man. The uncle hesitated, realizing he might have underestimated Jake. "Documents, huh? Fine, but I'm not leaving empty-handed," he said, stepping back. "You'll pay for this." Jake stepped closer, locking eyes with him. "I'm taking care of Emily now. If you try to interfere, I'll make sure the law is on my side," he said with an authority that made the man retreat. After a few more harsh exchanges, the uncle realized he wouldn't get what he wanted at that moment. "This isn't over," he threatened before leaving, slamming the door. Jake let out a sigh of relief but knew the momentary peace might be short-lived. He climbed the stairs and went to Emily's room. She was sitting on the bed, hugging the dog tightly. "It's okay, Emily. He's gone," Jake said, trying to reassure her. Emily looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "He's not going to take me, is he?" she asked, scared. Jake hugged her. "No, sweetheart. You're safe here. I promise I won't let anyone hurt you." The situation cast a shadow over the house, but also reinforced the bond between Jake and Emily. "We'll handle this together," Jake said, determined. And so, even with the uncle's threat looming over them, the family remained united, ready to face any challenge that lay ahead. After the tense visit from Emily's uncle, Jake was deeply concerned. Determined to protect Emily, he immediately sought out his lawyers. "What can I do to ensure Emily's safety and speed up the adoption process?" Jake asked, his voice filled with anxiety. The lawyer reassured him, "We will expedite the proceedings and take legal measures to prevent any interference from her uncle." The following days were a whirlwind of legal preparations. Jake, Susan, and Emily made frequent visits to the lawyer's office, reviewing documents and preparing for the hearing. "Everything will be fine, Emily. We're doing this to secure your future," Jake said, trying to calm the girl. On the day of the hearing, Jake, Emily, and Susan arrived at the courthouse with a mix of nervousness and hope. When they entered the courtroom, they noticed Emily's uncle sitting in a corner, clearly intoxicated. The judge, a woman with a firm posture and attentive gaze, called the case. Mr. Anderson, please come forward with the child. Jake held Emily's hand and approached the judge. We are here to formalize Emily's adoption, Jake began, his voice firm but filled with emotion. She has brought new life to our home, and I want to ensure she has safety and love. The judge looked at Emily with a gentle expression. Emily, are you happy with Mr. Anderson? Do you feel safe with him? She asked. Emily nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. Yes, I am very happy. Jake takes care of me, and I love him, she replied, her voice trembling. At that moment, Emily's uncle stood up clumsily and tried to interrupt. She is my niece. I have rights, he exclaimed, his voice slurred from alcohol. The judge looked at him sternly. Mr. Thompson, your conduct and current state are not appropriate for discussing the custody of a child. This hearing is about Emily's well-being. Confirming Emily's statement and observing the situation, the judge made her decision. Based on the testimonies and evidence presented, it is clear that Emily is in a safe and loving environment with Mr. Anderson. Therefore, I grant final custody and formalize the adoption. The room was silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Jake hugged Emily tightly, both of them crying with happiness. You are officially my daughter now, Jake said, emotional. Emily returned the hug, feeling safe and loved like never before. Susan, who had watched everything with her heart in her mouth, couldn't hold back her tears either. Finally, our family is complete, she said, hugging Jake and Emily. The sense of relief and happiness was palpable. Let's go home and celebrate, Susan suggested as they walked out of the courthouse together. Back at the mansion, the house was prepared for a grand celebration. Balloons, flowers, and a special cake were ready to mark the occasion. Welcome officially to the family, Emily, Susan said, handing her a gift. Emily opened it and found a necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. Thank you, Susan. I love you all, Emily said, hugging her. Margaret, in a rare moment of clarity, also participated in the celebration. Emily, dear, I'm so happy for you, she said, holding the girl's hand. Thank you, Margaret. You are the best grandmother in the world, Emily replied, touched. Jake watched the scene, feeling a peace and happiness he hadn't experienced in a long time. The night was filled with laughter, music, and stories, with everyone celebrating the new chapter in Emily's life. You brought joy and unity to our home, Emily. We are blessed to have you, Jake said as they toasted. Emily, finally feeling safe and loved, smiled. I am the luckiest person in the world to have you as my family, she said, her heart full of gratitude. And so, with the adoption officialized, the mansion that was once silent and lonely now vibrated with the joy and energy of a new life. The family was complete, ready to face any challenge life might bring together. With the adoption officialized, life at Jake's mansion was completely transformed. Emily, now officially part of the family, felt more secure and loved than ever. The mornings were filled with laughter, with Emily running through the garden with her dog while Jake and Susan watched with smiles on their faces. She really brought new life to this place, Susan commented while preparing breakfast. Jake, watching Emily play, felt a deep gratitude. I never imagined I could be this happy again, he said, feeling blessed to have found Emily. Margaret, in her moments of lucidity, also shared this joy. The house is full of life again, she said, holding Emily's hand. And it's all thanks to you, dear. Emily continued attending school, where she made many friends. Jake and Susan were always present at school meetings and events, supporting her every step of the way. You're doing very well, Emily. We are so proud of you, Jake said after each report card. Emily responded with a radiant smile. Thank you, Dad. I'm doing this for all of us. The musical moments with Margaret continued to be a highlight in their daily routine. Emily, Jake, and Margaret sang together, strengthening their bonds through music. Music has a special power, Margaret commented one day while they sang one of their favorite songs. It unites us and brings joy, Emily agreed, feeling connected to her new family. Susan, who initially hesitated to accept Emily, now treated her like a granddaughter. Shall we cook together today? Susan asked. I have a new recipe I want to teach you. Emily, excited, responded. Of course, Susan. I love cooking with you. The afternoons in the kitchen were filled with laughter and culinary delights. You are a great helper, Emily, Susan said proudly. The mansion, once silent and lonely, now vibrated with the energy of a new life. Jake and Emily spent hours together in the garden, planting flowers and sharing stories. You brought color to my life, Emily, Jake said as they planted a new rose bush. And you brought love to mine, Emily replied, hugging him. Days passed, and the family found a new rhythm of life. The holidays, once filled with melancholy, were now full of joy and celebration. This is the best Christmas ever, Emily said as they decorated the tree together. Jake, seeing the happiness in her eyes, knew he had finally found the peace he had long sought. And so, the story of Emily, Jake, Margaret, and Susan continued to unfold, marked by moments of love, overcoming challenges, and unity. The mansion, once a symbol of loss and sadness, was now a vibrant and welcoming home where each family member found their place and purpose. Life continued with its ups and downs, but together, the new family faced each challenge with courage and love. And thus, they found happiness, love, and a sense of belonging, celebrating life together and creating memories that would last forever.